Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Lucian's gaze darkened slightly when Elias mentioned Roxanne. However, he concealed it and recomposed himself before his parents noticed it. I'll ask Essie first. But if she wants to be with her mother, I won't stop her. Lucian only mentioned his arrangement for Estella and said nothing about Roxanne. Sonia felt even more incredulous when she heard that Lucian had even thought about whether he was going to keep Estella or let her go. "Oh, what's with you today, Lucian? Are you feeling sick? Do you have a fever?" Sonia asked. Although I've never liked Roxanne, I know Lucian is obsessed with her. In fact, no one knows that better than me. I was prepared for a long battle. Why is he giving up so easily? Could this be a trick or something? Lucian looked at her with a plain expression and asked in a deep voice, Haven't you been wishing to see me marry another woman? Why are you reacting this way now that I'm giving in? Sonia was rendered speechless. Nonetheless, she still felt something was amiss, so she shot Elias a glance. Elias looked at Lucian concernedly and asked, Did something happen? Did you have a fight with Roxanne? That was what Elias had in mind because he couldn't think of another reason for his son's behavior. Lucian didn't comment on that. Instead, he urged Sonia, I don't have her contact, so please help me contact her and ask her to come over. Or maybe I can go over to look for her. Sonia's eyes were filled with confusion. I'm only saying this tonight. After tonight, I might change my mind. Lucian turned to meet Sonia's gaze. Sonia was still hesitating. It's true. I've always wanted him to marry someone else. However, something is definitely wrong with Lucian tonight. What happened, Lucian? Tell us. Even if I can't help you, maybe your dad can. Sonia asked patiently because she wanted to get to the bottom of it. Lucian's patience was running thin. He instantly put down his fork and said, Since you're not going to help, I'll do it myself. Sonia grew anxious when she saw him walking toward the door. She quickly agreed to it and said, all right. I'll call Electra and ask her to come over. With that, she whipped out her phone to ring Electra. The call got through after just a few rings. With a scowl on her face, Sonia asked, Are you free now, Electra? You've been wanting to see Lucian ever since you came back, right? He's here with me now. Would you like to come over? That was the first time Sonia had asked to meet someone during dinner time. Fortunately for Sonia, Electra didn't mind one bit. In fact, Electra was elated when she heard she could see Lucian. Needless to say, she agreed to go over. Upon hanging up the phone, Sonia looked at Lucian helplessly and said, Electra said she's coming over. Sit down and have some food. After saying that, she sighed worriedly. What exactly happened? Why did Lucian change so suddenly? Lucian kept mum and sat in the same spot as before. Sonia glanced at Lucian before shooting Elias a look. She knew Lucian wouldn't listen to whatever she had to say, so she hoped that Elias could get some answers out of Lucian. To her dismay, Elias merely stared at Lucian with a grim expression and rose to his feet. It's your decision, so I'm not going to intervene, but you have to be responsible for your own decision. With that, he turned around and went upstairs. Lucian and Sonia sat in the living room and waited for Electra. Neither of them uttered a word to the other. After some time, they heard noises coming from the door. Sonia glanced at Lucian before standing up to greet the guest. Mrs. Farwell, the guest greeted. An elegant woman was seen walking in through the main entrance. Not only did the woman have a nice smile, but she also had a gentle voice. In fact, she seemed like a cultured and educated girl. In a dark green dress, Electra was holding a white purse in one hand and Sonia's arm affectionately in the other. Ever since she returned to the country, she had met up with Sonia a few times, so they were close. Obviously, Sonia liked Electra and thought Electra would make a perfect daughter-in-law. I'm so sorry for asking to see you at such an odd time. have you had your dinner?" Sonia asked with a smile. Electra returned with a smile of her own and replied, "It's all right. I'm on a diet. I don't eat at night." The two of them entered the living room. When Lucian heard them approaching, he rose to his feet and greeted the guest gentlemanly. "It's been a while, Lucian. You look so mature now." Admiration flashed across Electra's eyes when she saw Lucian. They had parted when they were both still teenagers. Over the years, Electra had seen Lucian on the television frequently, and she knew he had changed a lot. However, only when she saw him in person did she realize how much he had changed. Lucian politely reached out to shake her hand. Indeed, it's been a while. You look prettier now." Electra smiled sheepishly in response. Sonia had forgotten all about her bafflement from earlier on when she saw the two of them interacting harmoniously. With a smile, she said, "You guys talk, okay? I'll make some coffee." She turned around and left to give them some privacy. Electra sat down on the couch next to Lucian and sized him up. She had been spending time with Sonia over the past couple of days, so she had heard quite a bit about what was going on between Lucian and Roxanne. "Now that I see him, it's really hard to imagine him doing those things for a woman. Besides, why is he seeing me? Is he not worried about Ms. Jarvis misunderstanding the situation?" At that moment, Electra's gaze was filled with puzzlement. "Do you have a boyfriend or someone you're into?" Lucian asked straightforwardly. Electra was dumbfounded when she heard the question, and she cast him a confused glance. "Isn't that a private question? Why is Lucian asking me that the minute he sees me?" Upon seeing the earnest expression on Lucian's face, Electra instinctively became serious as well. No. What's up? What do you think about me? If you don't mind, we can get our marriage certificates right away." Electra got even more confused. "What's happening? We've only met each other, and he's already asking me to marry him. If I remember correctly, Sonia told me Lucian is in love with someone. If that's the case, why is he doing this? Besides, where are we supposed to go to get our marriage certificates at night?" Lucian, have you been drinking? Do you know what you're talking about?" she asked. With a straight face, Lucian answered, "I haven't been drinking." Electra could not wrap her head around it when she heard his answer. In a deep voice, Lucian said, "That's the reason I asked to see you. You can give it some thought whether you want to marry me or not." Electra didn't know how to respond, as Lucian seemed adamant about getting married. At that moment, Sonia was leaving the kitchen after preparing the coffee. When she heard what Lucian said, she couldn't help but be astounded. "I thought Lucian said those words in a fit of rage. That's why I thought he would change his mind the moment he saw Electra. However, he's actually doing it. Furthermore, he's being so straightforward. Lucian, are you facing some difficulties? Otherwise, why would you suddenly ask me to marry you?" Electra regained her senses, and a guess slowly surfaced in her mind. Something must have happened, and Lucian is forced to do this. What could it be? Sonia halted in her tracks when she heard Electra's question. She also threw Lucian a confused glance. "I've been asking him that question, and I couldn't get an answer out of him. Now, even Electra thinks something has happened. That has to be the case, then. Will he tell Electra the truth?" Sonia waited by the entrance of the kitchen. She had thought she could eavesdrop on their conversation. To her surprise, Lucian suddenly turned toward her and met her gaze. Sonia froze momentarily before coming back to her senses and serving them the drinks nonchalantly. I made coffee for you guys. Have some while you guys talk." Then she sat down next to them. Please give us some privacy. I need to speak privately with Ms. Lane," Lucian uttered in a deep voice. As soon as those words fell, Sonia froze, and her expression stiffened. "What do you want to talk to her about? Why must you hide it from me?" Naturally, Sonia was displeased. However, Lucian wasn't keen on explaining himself. For a moment, The atmosphere in the room became tense. Feeling the tension, Electra quickly said, Mrs. Farwell, I suddenly feel like eating the finger food you make. Would you mind making some for me? Only then did Sonia give in and say, carry on then. I'll make some finger food for you. After saying that, Sonia went back to the kitchen reluctantly. Lucian and Electra continued talking after Sonia left. While Sonia was making finger food in the kitchen, she tried her best to listen in on their conversation, but to no avail. Half an hour later, Sonia couldn't take it anymore. She stopped what she was doing and wanted to check on them. Unexpectedly, she saw them standing up and seemingly leaving the moment she left the kitchen. What's the matter? Sonia looked at them in confusion. Mrs. Farwell, I'm sorry, but I'm in a rush. I won't be able to eat those finger food today. Please save some for me, and I'll come again another day. Electra smiled.
In a rush?
Sonia threw Lucian a suspicious look. Upon meeting her gaze, Lucian said flatly, I'm bringing her to the city hall to collect our marriage certificates. I've already contacted the city hall, and they told me they would wait half an hour for us. He turned to look at Electra, signaling for her to pick up the pace. No one knew what they had talked about, but Electra had a natural expression on her face. In fact, she even picked up her purse cooperatively and rushed toward Lucian. Just like that, they walked toward the door, one after another. Sonia was undeniably happy to see his son fulfilling her wishes by marrying another woman. However, she could not help but find it weird. Why are you in such a rush? Does Essie know about this? Sonia chased after Lucian. Without turning back, Lucian answered, I'll tell her after I collect the marriage certificate. The two of them got into the car right away. When they were on their way to the city hall, Electra was still in utter disbelief. Did I really just say yes to him? I'm getting married to my childhood sweetheart whom I haven't seen in years. This is surreal. Lucian noticed she was lost in thoughts, so he asked, what's on your mind? Electra snapped out of her reverie and smiled nonchalantly. Nothing. This feels like a dream. Besides, I didn't know the Farwell family is so influential that even the working hours for the city hall can be altered. I just need someone to stamp a seal. Besides, I'm merely asking one of them to help, so it's not a big deal. Electra smiled and went silent. Half an hour later, they arrived in front of the city hall on the dot, and both of them went in to receive their marriage certificates. After exiting the city hall, Lucian drove slowly toward the Damaris residence. Instead of reacting to the direction they were driving in, Electra was merely looking at her marriage certificate curiously. We're here, Lucian said in a deep voice after they arrived at the Damaris residence. Electra hummed an acknowledgement, passed Lucian her marriage certificate, and watched him stuff it into his pocket. The two then entered the residence. Mr. Farwell? Ever since what had happened the last time, the butler had been traumatized. He didn't dare to stop Lucian when he saw his arrival. Fortunately for the butler, Lucian halted in his tracks voluntarily and said, I'm here to see Mr. Damaris. Let him know I'm here. He'll want to see me. Upon hearing that, the butler heaved a sigh of relief inwardly before promptly agreeing. The butler went inside and reported, Mr. Damaris, Mr. Farwell is here. He brought a woman along. Jack had just returned from the hotel, and he still had rage boiling within him. Before Lucian arrived, Jack had been drinking on his own expressionlessly. When Jack heard the butler, a meaningful look appeared in his eyes. He then ordered the others to keep the alcohol aside before instructing, invite them in. The butler agreed and went out to welcome the guests. Not long after, Lucian and Electra appeared before Jack. Jack sized Electra up and smiled. You have good taste in women, Mr. Farwell. You managed to find yourself such an elegant and cultured lady within a short time. You're indeed incredible, Mr. Farwell. The moment Electra saw Jack, she could feel the dangerous aura Jack was exuding. Slightly terrified, she stood behind Lucian warily. Jack let out a cold snort when he saw how Electra was acting. Mr. Farwell, have you been secretively hanging out with the candidates lined up for you while Ms. Jarvis was awake? Otherwise, how could you have found someone so quickly? Could it be that this lady here is eager to marry into the Farwell family? Lucian's expression turned solemn. You're free to insult me, Mr. Damaris, but don't insult the person next to me. He took a step back and introduced Electra to Jack. This is Electra Lane, and we grew up together. The Lanes went overseas a few years ago, and Electra followed her family there. She only returned to the country a couple of days ago. You're right. She's an elegant and cultured lady, so I think you should choose your words wisely, Mr. Damaris. Not only did Lucian introduce Electra to Jack, but Lucian was also warning him. The Farwell family had a good relationship with the Lane family. Having spent a few years overseas, the Lane family had become a force to be reckoned with. Although the Farwell family couldn't do much if Jack were to treat Electra poorly, the Lane family would definitely have a go at Jack. Lucian's warning had evidently served its purpose. Faced with Electra before him, Jack was now much more disciplined than before. Electra greeted graciously with a smile. Nice to meet you, Mr. Damaris. I've heard a lot about you. Jack got up and extended his arm courteously for a handshake. You're so beautiful, Ms. Lane. You sure compliment Mr. Farwell so well. Even your family background is similar to his. You two sure are a match made in heaven. I doubt you'll invite me to your wedding, so I'll give you my blessings first. Then, he shifted his sarcasm-filled eyes to Lucian. There's a good catch close to you, Mr. Farwell. Why do you have to be so obsessed over Miss Jarvis? There wouldn't be so many problems if you had chosen Miss Lane from the beginning. Lucian looked at him coldly. I've brought her here. Where's the thing I want? Jack snickered. Be patient. What I want to see isn't her. An icy glint flashed across the eyes of both men. Lucian pulled out a marriage certificate expressionlessly, and Jack reached out for it. However, Lucian did not seem to have noticed that and instead walked past Jack and put the marriage certificate on the coffee table. Jack's face darkened drastically as his hand was left empty midair. Nonetheless, the instant he caught sight of Electra at the side, he immediately recovered his composure. A hint of contentment crept up his face. It doesn't matter what kind of attitude he gives. He has already lost. Jack broke into a smirk. He turned around and strolled to the coffee table to pick up the marriage certificate. The moment he saw the photo and the official seal on the marriage certificate, he grew even smugger. ETSK. Just look at this well-taken photo. Both Mr. and Mrs. Farwell are very photogenic indeed. Upon saying that, he shook his head regretfully. Then again, this is a marriage certificate. Why aren't the two of you smiling? Those who have no idea what's going on will probably think that someone forced you two into this marriage. The faces of Lucian and Electra clouded over when they heard Jack use Mrs. Farwell in his remarks. Electra turned to Lucian, thinking that he would do something. Unexpectedly, Lucian had already kept his temper in check. His face was devoid of expression as he fixed his eyes on Jack. Mr. Damaris, isn't the marriage certificate what you want? Nothing else really matters that much, no? No one else, other than the few of us here, will get to see this thing anyway. No matter what kind of blatant provocation Jack made, Lucian was unaffected. Feeling bored, he ultimately returned the marriage certificate to Electra, who received it and kept it away. You've seen what you wanted, Mr. Damaris. Now then, it's time you give me what I want. Lucian uttered grimly. Jack turned around unhurriedly, opened the drawer, and took out a small glass bottle. It was a transparent bottle, and in it was a colorless and transparent liquid. At one glance, it looked like a serum, the kind women used in their skincare routine. Here. Jack held the bottle out to Lucian. He was about to flaunt his remarkable medical skills again, but Lucian snatched it away before he could do so. The crease on Lucian's brows deepened as he scrutinized the bottle in his grip seriously. Since he barely had any medical knowledge, there was no way he could tell if the bottle of transparent liquid was the so-called antidote. Since you did as I said, Mr. Farwell, rest assured. I'm a man of my word. That is the antidote for Ms. Jarvis. She'll regain consciousness as long as you feed it to her. A hint of displeasure surged within Jack, but he quickly suppressed his emotions. Ms. Jarvis is my business partner, after all. There's no reason I'd harm her. Instead of uttering a response, Lucian shot Jack an unfathomable look before he took Electra with him and strode off. Looking at Lucian's and Electra's retreating backs, Jack felt another wave of vexation wash over him. He furrowed his brows and muttered to himself, childhood sweethearts? The Lane family? Isn't that too much of a coincidence? Regarding Lucian's love for Roxanne, Jack was not at all doubtful about it. After all, he figured that Lucian would not have agreed to his request if that was not the case. Yet, he thought Electra's sudden appearance at this juncture was too much of a coincidence, so much that he could not help but feel suspicious. After some deliberation, Jack decided to call Kevin over. Go and find out who exactly Electra Lane is. I must find out the truth so that I can feel assured. That very night, Kevin began his extensive search on Electra. In less than half an hour, he retrieved some results. Mr. Damaris, I found it. As Mr. Farwell said, Electra is indeed the daughter of the Lane family. The Lane family and the Farwell family are considered family friends. A few years ago, the Lanes decided to go overseas, and Electra followed along too. However, there aren't any clues as to why she's back recently. Kevin conveyed the investigation findings to Jack respectfully. Despite the lengthy report, Jack did not hear anything related to the marriage. He knitted his brows in dismay. What about the marriage between the Farwell family and the Lane family? It's such a big matter. There's no way the Lanes didn't show any response whatsoever. Looking at Lucian's and Electra's retreating backs, Jack felt another wave of vexation wash over him. If I'm right, any family will be eager to announce it to the whole world if their daughter gets to marry Lucian. How is it possible that there's no news from the Lane family? Jack was particularly suspicious about that. Kevin recalled his investigation findings and said cautiously, I didn't discover any reaction from the Lanes to the marriage news while I was investigating. It's almost as if they didn't know about the marriage. Jack narrowed his eyes pensively. No reaction? Perhaps they're really clueless about this matter. And one possible reason why they're clueless is that Lucian and Electra haven't had time to inform them. Then again, it's also possible that this marriage is merely a ruse. Kevin was stunned to hear those words. Marriage is such an important matter. How can they not inform their family about it? Jack stayed silent for a long while, seemingly pondering over something. Frustration engulfed him initially, but that soon transformed into contempt and disdain. Get someone to continue keeping an eye on the Lanes. Even though Kevin did not quite understand Jack's meaning, he politely nodded regardless and immediately left to execute the order. With that, Jack was the only one left in the living room. If I'm right, any family will be eager to announce it to the whole world if their daughter gets to marry Lucian. How is it possible that there's no news from the Lane family? At the thought of Kevin's findings report, Jack curled the corners of his lips into a cold smile. How interesting is it that the Lane family doesn't know about the marriage? Don't tell me the CEO of Farwell Group actually got driven to the edge of the cliff by me and had to fake his marriage? Or did Electra and him agree to a paper marriage? But if that's the case, I wonder what he did to win over the heiress of the Lane family. Her family background is so prominent, so why is she willing to be his nominal wife? Or should I say, is Lucian really that charming? Anyway, none of this matters. Whether or not it's a real marriage, I'll find out sooner or later by monitoring the Lane family's response. If Lucian dares to deceive me regarding this matter, Jack narrowed his eyes dangerously. That bottle he gave Lucian was indeed the antidote that could save Roxanne. Nevertheless, It was impossible to entirely remove the toxins in Roxanne's body based on just that tiny bottle of antidote alone. The amount in that bottle was only 1/5 of the dosage and was enough to keep Roxanne conscious for some time. After the antidote effects wear off, if Lucian keeps his promise and leaves Roxanne, I'll naturally let Roxanne have the remaining dosage. But if he dares to lie to me, I'll make sure he has to beg me for help by then. At the thought of Kevin's findings report, Jack curled the corners of his lips into a cold smile. After leaving the Damaris residence, Lucian did not even spare time to send Electra home and brought her to the hospital instead. As she sat in the rear passenger seat and observed how worried he looked through the rearview mirror, she could not help sighing inwardly. So, it turns out that everything Sonia told me previously is true. I can't believe he'd love someone to this extent. Her realization of how strong his love was for Roxanne only piqued her curiosity about what sort of woman Roxanne was. Even though he was taking her to the hospital in the middle of the night, she did not utter a single complaint. It was only after Lucian had sped all the way to the hospital that he realized he had forgotten to send Electra home. Things had been so busy over the past few days that he could hardly think straight. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry for troubling you to come with me to get the marriage certificate at such a late hour, then bringing you here to the hospital. If you don't mind waiting in the car for a while, I'll ask my assistant to come over and take you home." Electra chuckled unconcernedly. Lifting her gaze to look toward the hospital, she replied lightly, No. I want to go in and see the woman who's capable of making you care so deeply about her." Then she turned to Lucian with a smile. "You don't mind, do you?" The pair looked at each other for a few seconds. She could see his gaze gradually soften when she mentioned Roxanne, and her curiosity heightened. "Part of the reason I managed to obtain this bottle of antidote is because of you. In a way, you have a part in saving Roxanne. She should thank you personally," he answered in a deep voice. Upon hearing his response, Electra could not resist saying teasingly, Really? Aren't you afraid she'll get jealous when she wakes up and sees you with another woman? No woman can bear such a shock, no." The mere thought of waking up after being unconscious for 3 or 4 days to see the man she loved standing next to a strange woman was too much for Electra, let alone that it was the reality Roxanne was about to face. Lucian smiled calmly. Roxanne isn't like that, so you don't have to worry. Since you wish to meet her, you should go in with me." After saying that, he turned and led the way without waiting for her to respond. She was momentarily surprised. Recalling what Lucian had said earlier, she could not suppress her curiosity and hurried after him. As soon as the pair exited the elevator, they saw Madeline quietly wiping her tears next to the door of the ward. The pair looked at each other for a few seconds. She could see his gaze gradually soften when she mentioned Roxanne, and her curiosity heightened. She had been tending to Roxanne inside the room and working with the specialists to help Roxanne regain consciousness. But no matter how hard they tried, their efforts had been futile. In fact, Roxanne's condition had even worsened. The sky was pitch black, and it was going to be morning soon. However, they had yet to make any progress. Unable to bear staying in the ward any longer, she had left the room in despair and gone out to the corridor to compose herself. However, try as she might, she could not stop her tears from flowing. When she saw Lucian walking out of the elevator, she was stunned for a few seconds. Then she rushed forward anxiously and grabbed his arm. How did it go, Mr. Farwell? Have you thought of a way to save Roxanne? There's no time left. If we delay any longer, I know the only way he can save Roxanne is to comply with Jack's wishes and marry someone else, but I can't worry about that anymore. If we delay any longer, she'll die. When Lucian noticed her red-rimmed eyes, his gaze dimmed with concern. What happened? Did her condition worsen again? He could not think of another reason that could have caused Madeline to cry so bitterly. Madeline turned to glance in the direction of the ward while struggling to steady her tearful voice. It was just hardening of the blood vessels at first, but the effect of the treatment these few days has been little to none. Now, several blood spots have appeared. A look of shock and distress filled his eyes when he heard that. He pulled her hand away and strode into the ward. Inside the room, a group of specialists had gathered around Roxanne. They wore expressions of helplessness and pity. How is she?" Lucian asked coldly. The specialists bowed their heads, not knowing how to respond. They were afraid of incurring Lucian's wrath if they told the truth. Having followed him into the room, Electra felt a chill run down her spine when she saw the anger on his face. Nonetheless, she calmly reminded him, Lucian, hurry up and give Miss Jarvis the antidote." Everyone suddenly took notice of her presence, and their gazes shifted between her and Lucian as they wondered who she was. Madeline followed them into the room. She had noticed the woman while they were standing in the corridor, but had been far too worried about Roxanne's condition to ask about her. However, after hearing the woman address Lucian as though they knew each other very well, she could not help feeling sorry for her best friend. Madeline's eyes flashed with hostility as she asked, "Who are you?" Electra was taken aback. Knowing that Madeline had misunderstood, she smiled and replied, "Let's return to that question later. The most pressing matter now is to let Miss Jarvis take the antidote." "Antidote?" Madeline's expression stiffened, then turned into a look of distress. "If Lucian has obtained the antidote, that means he has married another woman. I guess it must be her." Nonetheless, she knew he had done so to save her best friend's life, so she could not say anything. All she could do was keep the pain she felt to herself. "You should do it." Lucian had walked over without her realizing it and was holding out a clear bottle. Madeline raised her hand and took it from him in a daze, her heart welling up with sadness. "Mr. Farwell, are you trying to avoid arousing suspicion? Otherwise, why would he entrust such an important task to me?" His brows drew together in a slight frown. In a low voice, he replied, "I don't know much about pharmacology. Since you're a doctor, it'd probably be safer if you did it." Madeline's eyes flashed with hostility as she asked, "Who are you?" After saying that, he turned and strode back to the hospital bed. For a moment, Madeline felt at a loss. She turned her head to look at Electra, then glanced at Roxanne on the hospital bed. A trace of hesitation flitted across her eyes. "When Roxanne wakes up and learns of the news, I wonder how she'll take it." However, she only hesitated for a split second before quickly walking forward. "Roxanne is in no condition to wait while I get the details of what happened. We'll deal with it after she takes the antidote. Mr. Farwell, could you please help to lift her?" She stood next to the bed, assuming a professional attitude. Little by little, Madeline poured the antidote into Roxanne's mouth. She had only gotten halfway through when the latter's face suddenly turned pale. Madeline's heart sank, and she quickly stopped feeding her friend the antidote with a conflicted look in her eyes. "She appears as though she's in just as much pain as the other night. The poison is acting up again. What's happening?" Lucian had also noticed the unusual reaction. His panic was almost palpable around him, yet he held Roxanne as gently as ever for fear of accidentally hurting her while she lay unconscious. Madeline's voice trembled a little. The poison is acting up again, and this time, more violently than before." Lucian tightened his grip when he heard what she said. Why is this happening?" He had witnessed it himself when the poison flared up previously. Madeline is now saying that this time is worse than the last. The person in his arms seemed to be in extreme pain. Despite being in his embrace, she was still shivering, her face ghastly white. "Roxanne," Lucian's voice grew strained, and there was a trace of imperceptible panic in his eyes. "I've already brought the antidote over. Why is this still happening? What should we do now? Is the antidote useless?" He lifted his gaze to stare at the group of specialists by the hospital bed. The specialists exchanged glances. After some time, Madeline uttered through gritted teeth, "This is supposed to be the time when the poison flares up, and it's already the third day." "Midnight." Jack timed it to the second. "If I wait until morning, I'm afraid Roxanne won't be able to hold on anymore. That realization caused a wave of fear to wash over Lucian. A steely look flashed across Madeline's eyes. We must get Roxanne to consume the antidote as soon as possible. She has no choice except to put up with the pain. She was well aware of the suffering Roxanne was presently experiencing, but there was no other way. What must I do? Apart from cooperating, Lucian did not know what else he could do. He could only hate himself for being helpless. Madeline leaned over again and aimed the flask at Roxanne's mouth.
Hold her down.
Don't let her struggle. He responded with a grunt. Then, he gazed at the woman in his arms, who was in pain, and held her limbs in place. Meanwhile, Madeline was trying to get Roxanne to drink the antidote. She tried for some time, but with no success. Roxanne had gritted her teeth firmly as she struggled with the excruciating pain, and she reflexively resisted everything that tried to enter her mouth with her tongue. As there was so little antidote, Madeline immediately stopped when she saw that her best friend was not cooperating after 2 attempts. What's the problem? When Lucian saw her stop what she was doing, yet the antidote in her hand was still unfinished, he grew anxious. Madeline's expression was somber. Roxanne is rejecting the antidote. I can't get her to take it. Lucian's eyes instantly darkened when he heard that. Is there no other way to get the antidote's effects? Madeline shook her head. The concentration of this antidote is too high to meet the conditions for injection, so it can only be taken orally. She was well aware of the suffering Roxanne was presently experiencing, but there was no other way. After saying that, she anxiously glanced at her best friend. I honestly have no idea how to get Roxanne to take the antidote in this circumstance. Lucian stretched his hand out toward her. Give it to me. Madeline understood what he meant almost immediately, but she frowned and withdrew her hand to avoid his hand that was about to take the antidote. We still don't know the composition of Jack's antidote. What if it causes damage to our body if we drink it rashly? Jack used traditional medicine with unidentified compositions. No one can guarantee that he's using one poison to combat another. However, Lucian had already placed Roxanne on the bed and approached Madeline. It's a risk I have to take. Give it to me. He demanded in a tone that left no room for argument. Madeline's eyes flickered, but she ultimately handed him the antidote after glancing at Roxanne's anguished expression. Everyone witnessed Lucian pouring the remaining antidote into his mouth without hesitation before leaning over and drawing Roxanne into his arms. He forced her to open her mouth by pinching her cheek with his other hand before slowly pressing his lips against hers. Only after Roxanne had swallowed the remaining antidote did Lucian finally let go of her. Everyone also heaved a sigh of relief. It was apparent that the antidote had lessened Roxanne's suffering, though her brows remained slightly furrowed. Madeline's tone also softened significantly. The antidote is taking effect. After saying that, she raised her head and glanced at the specialists on the other side. Thank you, everyone. You can all go and get some rest. I'll handle it from here. The specialists, who had indeed been working non-stop for several days, excused themselves and turned to leave after hearing what she said. Only Roxanne, Madeline, and Lucian were left in the ward in the end. The situation earlier was so chaotic that Electra stayed at the doorway, not daring to go closer. Now that Roxanne's condition had stabilized and everyone had left, she slowly made her way over to the bed and stopped, curiously staring at the person lying there. The woman on the bed had an exquisite face. Even though she was unconscious and ghastly pale, she gave off a comfortable and pleasant feeling to anyone that looked at her. Even Electra, who was meeting Roxanne for the first time, could not help but feel awful for her after seeing her and remembering what she had been through earlier. She was even more shocked to see Lucian feeding Roxanne the antidote without a care for his safety. I can't believe he can love someone to such an extent. At the same time, she also fully understood why Aubrey had failed after waiting for 6 years. In the face of such love, she has no chance of winning at all. After glancing at Roxanne, who was still unconscious, and then at Lucian, who could not conceal his worry at her side, Electra came to terms with it. Initially, the Lane family was considering a marriage arrangement with the Farwell family. However, she now no longer had such thoughts. All she could do was withdraw into the role of Lucian's close friend and help him when he needed it. The antidote may not kick in so quickly, Madeline explained softly. After saying that, she shifted her gaze to Electra.
I didn't have time earlier, so now I'd like to ask, what's going on between you two?
Madeline refused to believe that Lucian would marry another woman so easily after seeing everything he had done for her best friend earlier. Moreover, Electra had shown little reaction when Lucian fed the antidote to Roxanne just now. At most, she had only seemed a little shocked. But if they aren't married, how could Jack give them the antidote? Madeline was filled with confusion. Electra met her gaze and explained softly, "Don't worry.
I'm not your enemy. I'm just here to help."
Her words made Madeline even more confused. As she turned her head to ask Lucian, she suddenly caught sight of the edge of a document peeking out of Electra's bag from the corner of her eye.
What is this?
Her heart constricted as she stared intently at the bag. Electra followed her gaze, and when she spotted the edge of the marriage certificate, an apologetic and regretful look flashed across her eyes. She glanced at Lucian to seek his opinion. Only after getting a nod from him did she take out the marriage certificate.
This is a marriage certificate?
Madeline interrupted her in disbelief. She stared at the person before her and then at Lucian.
You two did get married?
No wonder Jack handed the antidote over.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.